the history of it definitely started with native plains artists documenting their life, and we continue to do that today. And that's what my work is about, is really documenting and recording and communicating ideas.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to people from around the globe about their practice and passions in the field of print media and multiples. This episode of Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products. Speedball is thrilled to announce that they are extending their range of the beloved oil-based block printing ink. Partnering with Hello Print Friend host Ronaldo Gil Zambrano to give the line a fresh new look, they have launched 10 rich color options in convenient 8-ounce cans. The ink is formulated to be permanent, waterproof, and archival, but provides easy cleanup with vegetable oil. Available now for purchase through Speedball's website. This episode is also brought to you by Legion Paper. Legion is a fine art paper company representing the best papers in the world. They either stock it, source it, or make it with brands like Stonehenge, Somerset, Coventry, Reeves, Arches, and more. Legion is the best paper resource for every artist and printmaker's needs. Learn more about the variety of paper Legion stocks at www.legionpaper.com. My guest this week is Terran Last Gun. Terran is a Piikani citizen and visual artist whose work centers around the process of color exploration and visual documentation of nature, cosmos, cultural narratives, and recollections of home. We talk about indigenous abstraction, the tradition of Piikani Painted Lodges, studying at the prestigious Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and why his current canvases are often papers torn from vintage ledger books. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to get abstract with Terran Last Gun. Hi, Terran. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thank you for joining me. I feel like there's a certain kind of funny irony in that we've been living and working and moving in the same geographical area, and we finally get to sit down long distance while I'm in Washington State.
Right.
But I think that is just the nature of being busy art people. And so
Yeah.
we just have to steal time where we can. So I'm very happy to connect with you and looking forward to talking with you and learning more about your work and printmaking and all of that. So thanks for letting me borrow an hour of your Wednesday morning.
Yes, totally. I'm excited to just be on the podcast and share some of my studio practice with everyone.
Awesome. Well, before we get into my questions, would you let people know those classic Hello Print Friend questions, who you are, where you are, what you do?
Yeah, totally. Well, I'll start by introducing myself in Piikani. Oki Nixukoax, Nistu Anokok Sakwaina Mahka, Numach Tu Piikani. Hello, everyone. My name is Terran Last Gun. I am a Piikani citizen, also known as the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. My Piikani name or Blackfoot name is Sakwaina Mahka, which means Last Gun. It was my great grandfather Dick Kip's Blackfoot name that was transferred to me, and he had other names as well that he went by, but this was one of them, and that got transferred to me. And there's various other family members who used the name as well, Last Gun, and so that little bit of family history on that. I'm originally from Browning, Montana. That's where I was born and raised. Pretty rural community in northwestern Montana. We sit right up against the Rocky Mountain front there, which we refer to as Mistakiks, or the backbone of the world. And we border Canada. My reservation borders Canada, and so we're kind of right up in this corner. We also border Glacier National Park, which is our traditional territory. and yeah, so just that's a brief, like, the landscape and like where I'm geographically from, where my nation is located. And today, though, currently I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've been here since 2011. I came down to attend the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I received my BFA in Museum Studies and AFA in Studio Arts in 2016. And I focused on, for my AFA in Studio Arts, I focused on printmaking and photography while attending II. And what do I do? I'm a visual artist. That's what I consider myself, Piikani visual artist. And I work in various mediums currently. Like I said, I focused in printmaking and photography. So those were my early works are a lot of those mediums. But today, currently, I'm doing ledger drawings on antique ledger sheets and documents and records, and also paintings and murals are sort of the five, besides photography and serigraphs. In terms of printmaking, the technique I was really drawn to is screen printing or serigraphs and creating fine art limited editions.
Beautiful. So, kind of sticking around in that landscape of your childhood a little bit longer, what was the role of art in that time in your life?
Yes. Well, my father, Terran Last Gun, he's an artist. He's been an artist his whole life, my whole life. And so I definitely grew up around his work. He's a painter and also does ledger drawings. And so that's where I got some of my first ledger sheets from. And also for us Piikani people, we're part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, or Siksikates at the P, and that includes 4 nations. And so it's my tribe, Piikani. There's a Piikani in Canada, Alberta, and Ghana, or the Bloods, and Siksika, or Blackfoot, as they're known as. But collectively, we're known as the Blackfoot Confederacy. And my nation, we're the only ones in Montana. But so we, just to give a little context about that, because we all share a common language, we all speak Blackfoot language, we all share the same origin story, creation story, just all these cultural stories, narratives that are tied to the landscape. We all share that and are connected to it collectively. And one thing that I've always been drawn to is our painted lodges. And so we lived in lodges, or teepees, as a lot of people know them as, but I refer to them as lodges. And usually there'd be a camp of 300 lodges, and 10 would be painted. And so they're very rare, very unique, and very powerful, spiritual, living places that were painted. And so they can be broken up into 3 tiers. The bottom is the land, the middle is the helper, the authority, the animal, the weather element, different, whatever that helper might be to that individual. And then the top is the sky world, or the cosmos. And so I've always been drawn to the top and bottom, because the top is discs, these circles or polka dots, and that's what represents stars and sun and moon. And then the bottom has triangles, which is the mountains. It has mounds, which is hills, and then sometimes it's just flat for the plains. And so there's all these different sort of like a visual vocabulary that I've been able to learn about as I've gotten older and pull from an artistic point of view. And so those I've seen growing up a lot, attending especially Indian Days, North American Indian Days during the summer. That's our big powwow celebration, and everyone's camped. And some people, painted lodge owners will set up their lodges, and it was just always so fascinating to see them. And they're a cone shape, the lodge itself. When you're inside, there's all the poles, and they all cross each other at the top. And so there's all these visual elements of it that are so like inspirational that you can pull. And so that's one thing that I've always been drawn to growing up. And it's, a lot of people wouldn't look at it as art, but today, contemporary times, I think these are like classic Great Plains art that has been around
Absolutely.
for hundreds, even thousands of years on this North American landscape. And just the idea that we've been painting that long here in North America, that medium, no one really talks about it like that. But after that, I was just like, oh wow, we always think of the Western art canon as like what art is, but in North
Yeah.
America, there's this whole different outlook on it. What art means, those paintings, those lodges, they almost seem alive to me. They become
Mm.
alive and this living piece that is taken care of like a bundle or like a holy item. They're just there's so much that can be said about those, and those are a
Mm.
big inspiration to me, along with my father's work too. So
The lodges that you were seeing as child, were they historical? Are there people continuing to make them? Contemporary artists who are making new ones? Was it a combination of both?
yeah, no. So the history of them, they are usually passed down
Mm.
through family lineage, or they're completely new through dreams. And so
Hmm.
a lot of those lodge designs come from dreams, the dream world, and this animal or some helper coming to them in their dream and instructing them how to create this. And so the history of colonialism, settlers moving into Montana, a lot of things began to get traded or sold and landed in museums and college
Right.
university museums collections. But and then some have remained in families, so like today they're pretty rare, but they're still in existence, they're still there. And that's the beauty of it, that they have lasted on, and that some people are starting to revive or repatriate or restore, all these re words
Mhm.
are such
Yeah.
a great way to that how I envision my own art. A lot of it is like reestablishing our presence, our experience. But yeah, repatriating. Some things are coming back. Some things went dormant. It just went dormant is a good way to look at it, and it's just waiting for a family member to bring that back. But they're
Mm.
really hard. I've tried to look at my own family history and figure out, like, do we have a painted lodge in ours? And most people do. Probably everyone did, but it's just not well documented, and it's yeah, just the documentation part of it is scattered, but it
Mhm.
is there. It's part of it's more of the actual culture of us, whereas Christianity is a big has a big like presence on my reservation as well. And so there's those things that like that might hinder someone from taking on a lodge, just because into the contemporary times they're following this other sort of
Yeah.
spiritual route. But yeah, they're some are really old and some are new. And so when they get really old and damaged, and this is knowledge that is out there as well. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to share too much, but some of this is public knowledge, because yeah, it's very you're not supposed to duplicate anyone's lodge. That would
Mm.
bring harm, or that would just it's a taboo, I guess, in a sense. So you'd never copy someone and duplicate it, and that stands today. I think it does happen though, where people are like trying to figure out who has that lodge, maybe within a family. And like I said, this goes across the entire Confederacy, so it's just not us in Montana. This is in Alberta, Canada as well, and making sure you're just well rounded with the entire Confederacy is
Mhm.
pretty good. But yeah, that's how if they're ever worn out, they can get repaired. They can get
Mhm.
given back to the earth, to the nature, by either getting sunk in a lake or just left out on open plains. But probably not so much that today, the open plains thing, because of
Yeah.
theft and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I always found that fascinating too, how it could be worn out and then be restarted, in a sense, revived, just like transferred from one canvas to the one hide to the next hide.
Mm.
It's really
Yeah,
interesting about those
interesting.
lodges.
Yeah, beautiful. And so then when you were growing up, were you a kid who was drawing a lot? Would you paint alongside your father? What was the path between sort of childhood and then coming to IAIA?
Yeah, I never thought of myself as an artist growing up. I didn't even want to pursue art, because
Hmm.
I guess that's just like everyone was always like, "Oh, you're gonna be an artist like your dad," stuff.
Right.
I don't know. No, I'm not. I'm gonna do something else. And it's funny that I came to II to pursue museum studies, but then sort of fell into studio arts. And pursuing that. But growing up, I used to dance at powwows. I was a grass dancer, traditional dancer, and then eventually a prairie chicken dancer, which that style of dance, we say as Blackfoot people, originated amongst us. And so I always grew up going to powwows with my grandparents and my parents and just other powwow friends. And that was definitely a performance type of art, and where you're activating your full body to embody this sort of, I don't know, this style of dance. And then also the music, the drumming, the singing, the various types of songs. So I always felt creative in that sense. And then the powwow world is very colorful, a lot of different color combinations. And so I definitely, that has moved into like my color play and color use today. And then I just sort of did a little bit of drawing here and there with my dad, but not a lot. I was really into collecting for some reason, like collecting coins and toys, Hot Wheels. I had a really cool Hot Wheel collection.
I
And
feel like that's a good basis for a museum studies
yeah,
interest, you know?
and just, yeah, rocks. I still collect rocks today. I love rocks. My partner, yeah, we're always picking up rocks somewhere, Samantha. And so it's, we have this like big old collection. Wherever we move to, we're like trying to take them all with us. But yeah, no, I also wanted to mention, I attended the Pagan Institute. And at the time, the program I was under was called the Lost Children School. And it's a language immersion school. So they taught just the language, Blackfoot language, throughout the
wonderful
year. And so I was there from 4th to 7th grade, or 4th to 6th grade. And just that little time really instilled in me my language, my culture, these different stories that are, from an artistic point of view, you know, they're just so inspirational. Like the headdresses, those are sculptural, three-dimensional, and they're just so amazing. And like, those are high honor pieces. So not everyone has these different types of headdresses, but I've always thought about that and our war shirts. And it was because of that school experience of going to the Pagan Institute. And now they run the Cutswood School, it's called now. And it's K through 8th grade, I believe, or 1st through 8th grade. So yeah, that's a big important place on my reservation. That it's small, but definitely packs a punch, and really inspired me. And my uncle, the late Daryl Ropes Kip, he co-founded it. It's another member, and then my uncle, his son, Darren Kip Last Gun, he manages it today, and so it's still there, and that's a big part of who I am today. So I just wanted to mention that.
I mean, what a wonderful thing to exist in the world, you know?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know that it's no coincidence that when settlers and colonizers come someplace, one of the first things they try to do is disrupt language. It's one of the is forbid that form of communicating that's so intrinsic to a culture. And so what a powerful thing to have a school that's running today that's keeping that alive. Yeah.
It is. Like you said, the colonization and settlers moving in, sort of invading at that time, because there were things in place saying like this was our land, but they just kept encroaching and turning it into farmland. But then the boarding school era too, that was really meant to break the language and culture. And then the bison, that was meant to break our diet, our spirituality, all these things, like just hammering us throughout our history, that I feel I'm at the other end of it now, and we're able to, I don't like I said, going back to those restore, reaffirm, just reinvigorate the landscape from our perspective and point of view that has been sort of pushed to the side or even erased.
Yeah, definitely. That's been very actively and deliberately been sought to be destroyed, you know. And I think it's wonderful, the resiliency and dedication to keeping culture alive is really profound, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and even the love of community to push through because of instances like that too. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's so great that you got to have that experience and go to that school and that you've got the family connections there.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know. No, I've always cherished that, and I try to go back and visit the students there now and show them my art. I've done a few talks there since the last few years now. So
Very cool. Very cool. Well, where does printmaking come into this story of yours? Was that
yeah,
in New Mexico or any time before then?
no, basically New Mexico. My dad attended II for a few years. He didn't graduate, but he attended the school, and he's the guy who got me to go to II. He
Mm.
heard of the museum studies program, and that was something I sort of was interested in pursuing after I attended the Blackfeet Community College in Browning. And I received my associate's AA in or AS in environmental science. And so that's I kind of just I was jumping around like not trying to figure out what I want to do. And I always been drawn to culture, history, and items. I took a trip to
Mm.
Canada and we got to see all these Blackfoot war shirts that were supposedly traded back in like
Uh-huh.
the 1850s and were brought over to the Oxford University in England, and they brought all five back over to the Blackfoot people in Canada. So my school at the Blackfeet Community College bussed all of us up there, like whoever wanted to go, and we got to go into the collections and we got to like wear gloves and touch the items. And then those war shirts were made out of hides and they have symbols and like a lot of discs in the chest part representing the sun and other representations. And then they also had this couple there, one of the last remaining people with the rights to make those shirts. And so everything is about having the rights, not everything, but a lot of things involve having rights and also transfers. You have like in
Mm.
order to have a painted lodge, it has to go through a transfer to get to you, and that's just how things work. And so they had this older couple that made a modern version of one of the shirts, just all white hide, and I got to try that on, and so it felt really crazy to have one of those
Yeah.
original hide shirts from like the 1800s and even before that. That's how it just was, and so that was really a cool experience, and that really got me like thinking, wow, museums are actually pretty cool. We can
Mm.
connect with our cultural items, and of course there's a darker history to museums of stealing and
Yeah.
just taking and inaccessibility to the actual living cultures. You know, a lot of things that was being taught to university students about our culture didn't never made it to us until more contemporary times. And that's what my uncle Daryl Ropes Kip. He was a huge researcher, like super smart guy. Went to Harvard, and I just learned so much from him. Like growing up, listening to him, and really admire everything I've learned from him. But yeah, that's what got me into museum studies. I was like, this is a cool trip. I really want to pursue something like this and give back to my community. So that's what brought me to II, and that's why my dad was like, go here, do this. And I did.
Mm.
And I started to walk around in the academic studio building, which is most of the studio arts classes are. And I would see all these what I thought were posters at first on the wall, and they were all like, I was like, what are these paintings on paper? You know, I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
quite understand it because I didn't never seen it. I had never seen printmaking. I didn't know what printmaking was, but I just thought I was so drawn to it. I was like, this is such a cool aesthetic, like visual aesthetic that I'm drawn to, and I started to ask more about it, and I found started to learn about printmaking. And before I could take printmaking courses, I had to take like color theory, 2D fundamentals, I think drawing one. And so I added I and one of my museum teachers was like instructors. He told us that we should take a studio arts class so we can see the other side of the museum world. Like we're on the
Mm-hmm.
inside of it, but like get the artist perspective. And I was like, that's such a cool idea, but I was so nervous. I was like, that sounds so just hard. And I was like, but I want to challenge myself. So I took color theory, and that was just a lot of fun. And just learning how to paint, I don't know, textures, lines, all this different type of stuff, but using color. And so that was actually my introduction to color use. learning about complementary colors, learning about the color wheel, which is like my biggest tool today. And then eventually I said, I'm going to add on a minor. And so I was like, I'm going to do a minor. And so I started taking all the recommended classes. Eventually I was like, I'm going to do an associate and I'm going to focus on printmaking and photography. And so I took introduction to printmaking with Alex Pena. I learned a lot from that. I learned all the more woodcut, monoprints, linoleum, reductive lino cuts, and learned a lot. He's a pretty precise instructor who's no longer there. And then I took intermediate with Karsten Kreitney, who now works at UNM. I believe he's there. I learned a lot from him. We mainly focused on wood blocks and scale, so going much larger and just sort of really honing in on the press and the techniques of using that. And so, and then I eventually took Serigraph 1 and 2 with Jameson Chase Banks, who is also one of my mentors today. And that was the one I fell in love with. That was the technique that I was like, it's so fast, it's so quick.
Yep.
I'm just a little impatient when it came to the other ones, but I was like, this one is so quick. I can produce like multiples even quicker. And I just really was like drawn to that quickness of it. And it seemed like it required all these other equipment too, that I was like, okay, this is a kind of the odd child of the techniques. and some that like didn't give it the full, like I was always trying to push fine art limited editions, and I feel like it was hard to get in that realm with screen printing, I guess, and serigraphs at first. But then eventually I really enjoyed mono printing, where I could print the whole paper one color. And that was so much fun. And so I was like, I want to try this in screen printing. And so I started to grab these huge screens and tape off my entire like 30 by 22 inch Somerset or Stonehenge. Stonehenge is my favorite screen printing paper, but BFK Reeves, all these other ones I was using at the time too. And I'd print the whole paper one color, and it was a messy process, but in the end, like, it's just so amazing to see like this full paper one color that you can see the deckled edge. I was just like, this is such a cool look, and I've continued to pursue that whenever I do print. I really enjoy doing these full bleeds. It just makes the paper feel so different. And then all of a sudden, to me at least, I felt like it had this higher quality of like, I'm trying to push fine art with this, and this is something that's different. And that's where I felt like I was starting to get somewhere that felt like I could pursue this a little more. In the beginning, I was doing more, I don't know, I think these are just typical too, like political stuff, also comical stuff. Like I was always drawn to like robots, so I created these, what I was calling Indian robots. And people want me to do that on Ledger Drawing. Like people still like that. And I was doing that kind of stuff. And then I think I was in like advanced printmaking or something. And I did another one, and my one instructor was like, this is cool, but what else can you do? And that really stuck with me. Like, oh my God. Like, it kind of like rubbed me wrong, but then I was like, no, he's right. What else can I do? And
sometimes those moments are so important. Like when we hear something that does pop our ego a bit, and it makes an impression though. It's like, ow, this growth hurts, but I guess I need it.
Oh, definitely. Because after that, I really pushed myself to like explore just different things. And I think that's where the lodge design started to come into play a little more. Or like I said, the bottom being land and the top being the sky world. I started to play with those more after that. Even though I was using those elements, even in the Indian robots, like their body parts were these star Cosmo designs and like different things, like the mountain design. And so that's, after I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I should continue to develop. And so since then I always keep that in the back of my mind, like keep pushing yourself, don't get too comfortable, and work with. So my shapes have evolved. They were these lodge shapes, but now they're starting to be deconstructed and reconstructed, or just fragments of those symbols. And that's sort of where I'm at today. But that's how I learned about printmaking, was at II. And
Yeah.
I took all these classes. After that, I was like, I just took independent courses. Even after I graduated, I continued to take at least one class a semester, because that gave me 16 weeks to just work and play in the studio
Yeah, yeah, and access
versus,
to the equipment, which is huge, of course,
yeah,
for
versus
printmaking,
working
yeah.
with a print shop in town where they want $60 a screen, or like there's all these different things. And I was just like, once I learned that after I graduated, I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, this is not doable for me right now. I was like,
Mhm.
even the semester cost at first, I was like, oh my gosh, this is way too much. But after a while, I was like, okay, this is totally affordable. Like I could make this back at a market, or, a show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I did after I graduated. I continued to take courses and still learn. But after a while, after the pandemic, the pandemic shut a lot of everything down, even including the print
Mm.
shop at II and print shops around town. And that's when I was like, okay, what do I do now? And that's when ledger drawing came into play. And I started
Yeah.
pursuing
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to talk about the ledger drawing for sure, because 'cause they're so beautiful and intriguing. But I wanted to ask you about using these sort of unusual substrates in your printmaking, like paper bags and that
Yeah,
kind of thing. And that part of the print practice, which maybe evolved into more unusual substrates like historical leisures. But yeah,
yeah,
when did you kind
right.
of break from your favorites, the Reeves BFK and all that, and start using the other
Yeah,
formats?
yeah, that's a great question, because those are some fun. The paper bag series, kind of an ongoing series in a sense, has been really fun and different to work with, and even see framed. I think it's so cool to
Oh
see them
yeah.
framed. It was the II school, the, what is it, the store there, that's where they sell all like the papers, printmaking paper and supplies. And
Hmm.
the manager there at the time just wasn't using all these paper bags, and he knew I was in printmaking, and so he's the guy who suggested, do you want these to try printing on? And I was like, oh, that's such a cool idea. Yeah, like, sure, I'll take all these. And they're the exact same ones I still continue to use today. They're just this U
Hmm.
line, like 16 by 24 inches with a handle. And so I just ordered some after that. Actually, I ordered like a big box of them and continued to like just print different things. But that's what started it. And I just started printing on them, and the brown paper really makes
Mm.
the colors pop. And I had seen other paper bags done over art history, like Roy Lichtenstein, Andy
Yep.
Warhol. There was some native artists as well that had done these paper bags, and some of them were closed, collapsed. Like mine are most of the time just collapsed, but some were open. What is his name? His name is like Jemison, G Jemison or something like that. But he's Seneca artist, and he does a lot of bag art. He's gotten his work into like the Met and different collections such as those ones. But yeah, I was like, this is part of art history, and I want to have my take on it and play around with this. I think the paper, the color of it was really what intrigued me, because that's when I started to use a little more craft Stonehenge, the brown looking Stonehenge paper. I started to
Hmm.
experiment with that color and based on those paper bags. But it was just, I think I was thinking of, in terms of my own cultural background and even ledger drawing, it's all about being resourceful and using what you
Oh, uh-huh.
on hand in the moment, I guess you could say. And that was especially what it was for me as a student, not much money to get a lot of things,
Yeah.
took what I could get. And it was just, yeah, it turned out to be so cool to see those. And I had a show at Echo e Mano on Canyon Road in 2019, no, 2020. And it was I did 10 paper bags, a
Hmm.
series, and they were all framed for that show. And that was the first time really showing them in an exhibit, I guess, that I was able to do a solo show too. And that was a lot of fun. especially to see them framed. I've been working with a framer here in town, and she's just done such an incredible job with all my work. And it's just I don't like framing myself
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
know it could it takes so much money too sometimes. But I don't know, it just looks so much better when a professional does it.
Yeah, it's interesting how frames can elevate objects. So it goes from a paper bag, just like a standard Uline bulk order paper bag, to a work of fine art in a solo show in a gallery because you put wood and glass around it. It's
Yeah,
really interesting the kind of magic that frames have. Yeah.
it was really difficult too with that one, the paper bag. I mean, I've said, I've tried to. I know the history of printmaking is very accessible, and
Mm-hmm.
once you do have it, it is a community based medium, and I really like that about it. But I've also really liked learning about other printmakers who are trying to push it into the fine art realm, and especially
Mm-hmm.
screen printers or people creating serigraphs. I really admire them, and never really considered my work like that until I talked with Jason Garcia, who's a Santa Clara printmaker. And I just asked him one day, like, do you consider your prints to be fine art? And he was like, well, yeah. It's like, okay. And because I was still trying to figure out, is this, can we compete in those realms?
Well, particularly, I mean, I think it's a question for all printmakers, but screen printers do have it, I think, steeper of a hill to climb, maybe. And I think because people associate it with t-shirts and gig
Yeah,
posters
yeah,
and, kind of ephemeral or functional things. And for some reason, in the kind of traditional hierarchy of the art world, functional and fine can't be synonyms. They're sort of
yeah.
at like the opposite ends of what we think about in visual culture. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone was always trying to get me to do T-shirts too, and I was just like, I don't want T-shirts, but I did them. I did them for clubs, movie things, student things, and then I did a few on my own. But it's just never been something I really heavily wanted to pursue within terms of printmaking. It was always just using high quality paper. That was one thing my instructors kind of always pushed, was these are
Right.
the good ones to use. And then for screen printing, I use water-based inks. That's what I like to work with, and I like to mix my own colors as well. And yeah, I think that's, after asking Jason about that, I was like, okay, my work is fine art too.
Damn right. Yeah.
By doing the full bleeds, taking this extra step and time, and it's very process oriented. I think that sort of adds to that, because I was like, okay, well, yeah, obviously printmakers, they have are the wood block or even lithography. They're so time consuming, and so I was like, well, how I think that's the only way I could compete against them, is putting more time into my work. But some people think it looks so simple that there's not much time going into it, but really there is. It's pretty wild.
No, I feel like if you have any sense of color, particularly, you wouldn't think that looking at your work, because it's so, the colors you use are so sort of pitch perfect, right? They're functioning and doing heavy lifting in their individual quality, and then also in the way that they're interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I don't know. I think that if you know anything about color and art making, and you encounter some of these seriographs that you make, you couldn't think that, because you're like, this is not someone who's just popping colors out of a can and being like, oh yeah, purple and blue, there you go, it's art. Like, no, 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 no. There's a lot more going on here.
Yeah, there is, and that stems from a number of things. The lodges, a lot of colors used on the lodges are the primary colors: yellow, blue, red, but also black, sometimes green. And then I've always been drawn to op art, pop art, for those
Mm-hmm.
color schemes, messing with your eyes, optical illusion, play. Minimalism has always been top one. And then, of course, geometric abstraction, because of the lodges. We had our way of doing that as well. And And there's this what I like to think about, I guess, is like indigenous abstraction or even indigenous
Uh-huh.
geometric abstraction. How that is there's a few readings I came across or writings about Australia and their indigenous artists and how they're talking about indigenous abstraction where it does look abstract, but yet they're like maps or they're a
Yeah.
landscape or there's a star story. And I was like, that's exactly what we're doing over here too, you know. So I really
Mm.
admired those writings I came across that talked about this idea of indigenous abstraction. And even in Canada, First Nation artists they'll and curators they'll talk about that a little more too. And so I think of my work and also Blackfoot art or Piikani art sort of like that in the sense that yes, it is looks abstract, but there's so much meaning and layers to a lot of that work I that I can see in my own work, like especially printmaking. There's so many layers to the work, you know, even when the process itself from the full bleed to everything being layered on top. It's just one color on top of the other color is how I've worked in terms of screen printing. And I think that's a little different too from other screen printers. My registration, I would use my clear mylar, that what I would
Mm.
print on top of, and then move it, and then put the paper down and register, move it, and then print. You know, I it was a different way of printing that I learned that I see that other people do a little different. So I've always wanted to learn like the other ways of doing registration and stuff like that. But my way and the way I work in terms of these big shapes, and they're not really like it's okay if they fall a little to the right or to the left sometimes.
Right.
And so this method I use with the clear mylar really helps and assists in that process right there.
At what point did this all sort of evolve into the ledger drawings? I know you said that the logistical constraints of the pandemic had an
Mm-hmm.
influence on it, which is really understandable. But when did you start drawing on them, and what kind of ledgers are they, and where do you get them, and all
Yeah,
that stuff?
yeah. No,
Yeah.
ledger drawing is so much fun. My dad does it, like I said, and he gave me some of my first antique ledger sheets. They're anywhere from like a county record to a city record to a tax record to just a notebook and to cattle records, you know, these journals that were used personally to record their cattle. And so those are different sheets I have. And like you said, like going back to what I said, actually, with the pandemic, it really cut my access off to a lot of these print shops.
Yeah.
And I had shows coming up. I had a solo show at the AI Museum of Contemporary Native Arts store. They have it's called the Lloyd Kiva New Gallery, and it's kind of a smaller
Mhm.
space in the store there. And they typically give a students or mainly graduates shows there. And that was my second show that they had given me. And I just finished the Echoe Mono paper bag series, but I didn't get to finish the other work for
Oh.
that show. And it started to close down. And so I was like, oh no, I have to figure this out. And I was like, well, maybe it's time I use this ledger paper that I've been sitting with for a few years. I never wanted to draw on it because it's so like, it just feels like a historical record in a sense. And
Yeah,
I
kind of
didn't want to
precious, yeah.
destroy it or anything with a
Yeah.
I wanted to feel like I was really fully ready, my mindset ready to take this on. And yeah, the pandemic was like, okay, my show is in August. I was in the spring semester. That happened. And so I just was like, okay, let's figure this out. How can I do these ledger drawings? And so I took a lot of the ways of working in printmaking over to this ledger. And I was like, okay, there's one piece now. There's an original, unique drawing versus
Yeah.
multiples because over the years, I've always kept my number ones. And so I have a nice big collection of prints that are all my number ones that,
Mm.
you know, I'm getting ready for a solo show right now. And a lot of those number ones are going to be in that. And we could talk about that later too. But the just the ledger though, I was like, how can I do this? And so I really like working with versions. And so I'll pick a shape. And that's what I was doing in printmaking too. And then I'll work with it differently. I'll have a basic outline of a shape and then I'll fill it in differently and then fill it in with colors differently. And so I work in the series anywhere from 4 to 14 sometimes of like image that kind of looks like each other. And I really like how that looks in terms of an exhibit presentation where they're all the same size frames. I think
Yeah.
that looks so
Uh-huh.
clean. And that's what I try to go for within my own work. You know, I'm using white frames. I'm like, I'm really like trying. I'm always like telling people, please be careful touching those frames, because
Yeah,
I
yeah. This is
always get
a
my
museum studies influence right there. Yeah.
work because I've gotten stuff back where it's like a fingerprint, and I'm like, god dang it.
hmm
So that's how I work. I pick a sheet of paper, and then I'll pick like 10 of those sheets of that same size or however many number I want to work with. Lately, I've been working in threes based on Instagram because I like to post in threes. So I've been
Oh,
creating
nice.
work
Uh-huh.
in like 3, 6, 9, or 12 or 15. So, and that's like I said, based on that Instagram. I like to post in threes, and so lately I've been working in that sort of number. And numbers are fun. I really love numbers. Like I have probably a number of numbers that are my favorite. But the ledger, in terms of ledger drawing history, it started in like the 1850s, late 1800s, and from what my father has told me and from what I've read, because it is documented too, they were incarcerated plains artists,
Mm.
incarcerated plains warriors, who for most, and this is for most plains tribes personally, and for our region, we documented our success, our achievements, our coup stories on hides, even on our lodges. There's some lodges that are considered war lodges, and they'll have like a story, like it looks
Oh,
like
wow.
pictographs or petroglyphs, but these sort of like glyph like figures telling a story. And when these people were incarcerated, they were just given like random ledger paper. At the time, it wasn't really antique, but it was ledger paper at their time, and they would just record these different histories, anywhere from ceremony to courtship
Mm.
to just everyday life activities to eventually war, U.S. military. Like a lot of all of a sudden, I guess Americans and included in that mainly through the army and war and stuff like that. And then eventually, but it kind of moved into, well, it died out there for a while, and then it moved into what it is today, where like my father, he really focuses on cultural figures, warrior figures, these historical figures that are part of our culture and our history. And I really enjoyed that history of documenting because I felt like I was doing that in printmaking. I was documenting these stories, these experiences, these recollections of home, and I just carried that on into these other mediums that I worked with, and ledger drawing I felt like just was so fitting for that reason. And so it's definitely a native sort of art movement, I guess you could look at it like
hmm
that. It
Yeah.
started, but today I see Western, non-native Western artists trying to do that now too. But the history of it definitely started with native plains artists documenting their life, and we continue to do that today. And that's what my work is about, is really documenting and recording and communicating ideas that I'm interested in expressing artistically.
I'd love it if you could speak to the titles of some of the ledger drawings too, because some of them are just untitled, and
Yeah,
some of them are these really poetic turns of phrase, like a impressive journey ahead or when the
yeah,
time is right. And so nearing completion. I mean, they have these really powerful sort of narrative slices is what they feel like. And so how do you when you're working with geometric abstraction, how do you know what something's supposed to be called? And do you see the title as a way that's supposed to inform the viewer, or is it more kind of like a companion to the
yeah.
piece rather than like a didactic to the piece?
It's definitely another layer and really
Mhm.
gives the viewer insight into what I'm thinking about that particular work. A lot of my titles will come after it's created. And so it's really the color that helps the title, the way it feels. All of these titles are based on feelings and emotions and even other people's experiences, like my father's experience. He's really moved up in our culture, our way of life, our societies. So I really admire my dad for that. And some of those, what he's doing right now, influences my titles. And my cat influences my titles, like I
Aw.
just, whatever I'm feeling. But like, I really enjoy, because I feel my work is the types of color schemes I'm using, whether they're subtle or very vibrant and charged with energy. I really like to use those feelings in the title because that's what I'm trying to go for. I'm trying to create visual
Mm.
energy. I often think about insects and birds and how they're attracted or not attracted to certain colors, and how like they're so drawn in. And so I think as humans we can have that sort of similar experience where we see something in particular art and are just like so drawn into it. It just captivates us. And so I'm trying to do that through color and shape. And
Mm.
when these are done, that's when I sit with my notebook. I have a little notebook that I sit with, and then I just write down keywords that come to mind. So I'm just like for instance, this one was on cattle records, and some of the keywords that I have written down right now are ripple, intense, calming, intensity, connection, power, visual direction, color play, cattle, land, landscape, New Mexico, 1931, 2023,
Uh-huh.
surge, like all these different things that are coming to mind. And then I start to pull those keywords to create the final title. And then
Mm.
each piece I'm working with, I'll write. So if I'm working on 6, the first one I'll write number 1 on the backside, and then I'll move on to the second one and write those numbers. And so when I'm titling, I work in that order, and then when I'm photographing, I work in that order. And then when I send it to the gallery, it's all in order from when it was created every time. I'm glad you asked about that because it is a big part of my process. It just takes time to, and in the beginning, the titles were really based on, like I said, the land and the cosmos. Now they're
Mm-hmm.
entering, like I said, where I'm starting to deconstruct them and pull fragments from them. Now it's starting to take on an even more abstract, I guess, feel. And that's why the titles are starting to become based on experiences. Like, what does this color make me feel like? These two colors together. And then that's where the title comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely a whole another side to experiencing the work, I think. And can often be the case with abstract or abstracted work is people will almost instinctually, I think, go to the title to
Yeah.
try and get some sort of purchase, some sort of
Yeah.
foothold to come to understand the piece. And yours, you can tell that there's a lot of thought put into it.
I love some of the early artists, such as Ellsworth Kelly, but Frank Stella, I really love
Mhm.
his early work. Frederick
Mm.
Hammersley here in New Mexico, I love his color play and his shapes he was creating. And then Carmen Herrera, she had some really cool colors, schemes, and these bold shapes. And so those are for sure some people I'm really drawn to their work as well.
In the time we have left, I want to make sure that you give a chance to talk about your solo museum show that's coming up in
Yeah,
Montana later this year, which is because that's very exciting. Is that does that feel like kind of a homecoming at all? I know
it does.
it's in Missoula, which is not
Yes.
too far from where you grew up.
Yeah. No, it does, like you said, feel like a homecoming. I've been since the pandemic in 2020, I was working at a gallery here in town in shipping, and I was one of the first to get laid off. And after that, I was like,
Mhm.
they wanted me to come back, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I want to try this on my own. I want to try to pursue this full time. And
Yeah.
and I have been since then. And so it's been quite the journey to do that full time since then, since the pandemic. But thankfully, I've built up these relationships with various galleries that I've been working with, and who have given me shows in New Mexico. So most of my art career has been here in Santa Fe. I've chose to remain here because of the art scene here and just that it is an art community and that there's various opportunities as well. And so I always wondered if anyone in Montana was watching my career in terms of like museums mainly, but and even my own community. But most of my work has been shown in my own community, and obviously my
Mm.
family, they all know about it, and people I've interacted with at the BCC and Pagan Institute. But yeah, no, the ma'am, they reached out to me, the curator there, and they had been watching my work for a bit. I think they first seen it at Echo Mano too. Most people have seen my work at Echo Mano, and now I'm at Echo
Mhm.
Gallery, his second location.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I'm so excited for the show. It's 30 works. It's a freaking large show, and and like I
Mhm.
said, I save my number ones, and so there's gonna be four of my large serigraphs that I did these square doorway type works almost. They're so cool. They're full bleeds, 22 by 22 inches. I just picked them up from the framer last week,
Oh, cool.
and those are so I have to ship those out. And then I'm picking up six more ledger drawings that I just finished at the framer this week too, and those are going to be shipped out. But yeah, these are, and then I'm having nine of the paper bags in the show. They're being framed in Missoula right now. But it's a mix. It's the past 4 years of work.
Mhm.
A lot of serigraphs, like the nine paper bags. These four ones, the four. I have two other large serigraphs going there, and then I have ledger drawings. And so Gallery Hojo, who I work with in Albuquerque, I'm having eight of my work sent out from there, and then Echo Gallery, they're sending out a large serigraph I did and a large diptych ledger I did that actually won first place last year at the Santa Fe Indian Market, and it also got
Oh,
best of
nice.
Division A. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really happy. And actually, the show is titled after that diptych ledger drawing, which is called Future Cosmic Energy. And so my show in Missoula is called Future
Mm.
Cosmic Energy, and it's just this idea of like a lot of my work draws from the past. Like I like to think 10,000 plus years, and so I'm always trying to think of like, well, what does that next 10,000 plus years look like for not only
Yeah.
any but just humanity, human life in general, and and so that title was sort of based on that idea of looking at a timeline that is really expansive, thousands of years. And so I created this diptych
Yeah.
window. I like to think of it as a window that just allows you to sort of get lost in your thought. And I think most of my work, I'm hoping that people can just stare and see what comes to mind, I guess, because I think it's really interesting to hear what comes to mind for people. Even my partner Samantha, like it's interesting to hear what it makes her think of. And so yeah, the Missoula show is going to be good.
Yeah, and I think that that's a grand tradition in abstraction is contemplation
Yeah,
when
that's a
you look
great.
at the work because it's something that's figurative. It's I don't know if you could even make something that's figurative that's not narrative. Like you look
Mhm.
at it and you're like, okay, that's a dog, that's a plant, and there's some dynamic between them. Like you start to bring a very left brain experience, I think, really early on.
Yeah,
But with abstracted work, it does invite more, I think, of a subjective response because you're not sort of being told, you don't get the sense that there is an objective truth to it. And so
yeah,
that, of course, invites contemplation.
yeah,
So, yeah, I think
yeah,
that's super exciting. What are
yeah.
the dates for that exhibition?
The dates are April 18th through August 12th, and
Great.
so that'll be up for a good amount, a few months there. And the artist reception is May 5th, and so we're flying up for that, and then I'm doing an artist talk the following morning.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, we're actually like out of time. I
yeah,
can't believe it. I had so many more questions, but this has just been such a fun and wonderful conversation. So,
yeah. We'll have
um,
to do a
I
redo,
just,
volume two.
yeah, I would love to have you back on. We can maybe do a reflection after the museum exhibition. Let us know how it went and
Right.
what's in the future and all of that. That'd be beautiful. And in the meantime, where can people find you and follow you and
Yeah.
see your work? Yeah.
Well, they definitely can find me on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Both of them are at Terran Last Gun. And then my website is just terranlastgun.com. Those are easy access on your phone if you wanted to look me up quickly. But also, I like I mentioned, I do work with Gallery Hojo in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Echo Gallery here in Santa Fe. And then I also work with K Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York. And I guess the one that I've just slowly been working with, that I've been doing group shows with, and they carry some of my new work, is the McLean Gallery, and they're based in Houston. And so
Okay.
those are sort of the 4 people I work with at the moment. And that's a whole nother conversation, is gallery artists and how many you take
I
on.
know. Absolutely. Yeah, and that balance between like wanting to get your work out there, but then like every gallery is demanding work, and then
Yeah.
if you're very exacting with your work like you are, how do you balance that? We can all do that in volume 2. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a whole nother can of worms for sure. And I'm just like, what am I
For
doing? But I'm
sure.
doing it.
Well, thank you again. It's just been really, really delightful, and I'm so excited for what you have on the horizon, and I look forward to helping share it.
Cool. Thank you, Miranda.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content, like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor Timothy Pauschak digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from one of our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent you. But as always, the very, very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week. My guest will be Joshua Orsburn, an artist and collaborative printer working in Santa Fe. We talk about formative experiences in his childhood, working at the iconic Landfall Editions shortly after attending Tamarind, how we use art to process trauma, and how we make trauma-informed art with thoughtful and responsible methods. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.